Tough job.
On behalf of the family, thank you for coming this afternoon. Some of you from long distances. The family knows how grateful you are that Bob has been in your lives. They are just as grateful that you have been in his. And so they have invited all of us to a very special reception immediately following the service at Indiana University's Henke Hall, appropriately adjacent to the football stadium. The details have been provided for you on the back of your service program. Thank you for silencing your phones. Family and friends, we have come today to honor and give thanks for the amazing, unique gift of Bob Hammel. To remember him with sharing, with singing, with our laughter, with our tears. To begin to grieve our loss and to surround this family with tender, loving support. Will you pray with me? Oh Lord, our God, we knew this day would arrive someday, and now it has. Still, some of us are not ready, but oh, Bob was. And that alone is worth celebrating. We pause now simply to breathe in your breath of life. Help us become fully present here today in this moment, now in this space. For we arrive just as we are, as God and Bob knew and loved us. Amen.
You know, it's ridiculous. My name is Bill Hammel. I'm Bob's brother. Those are lines that I've said so many times. It's in the last 72 years, and always with pride. And it's unthinkable to me that the source of that pride is no longer here. But I'm glad to be able to say a couple things to you about who the man was. And I'm not sure who decided on the order of today's speakers, but putting me first seemed the best and bit misguided. I've done this kind of thing just 3 times in my life. The first was some 24 and a half years ago when my brother Jim, a high school basketball coach, died way too young. The second occurred approximately a year and a half ago at the memorial service for my best friend, a man who overcame the disadvantage of being a University of Michigan graduate and became such a close friend that I truly thought of him more as a third brother than a best friend. The third is today, for a man who was both a best friend and a brother to me, and who always insisted that despite the 16-year difference in our ages, we were so much alike that he was convinced I was his identical twin, who just happened to have a 16-year gestation. With Bob gone, I've run out of brothers and best friends, not to mention twins. So in all probability, you're seeing my farewell performance. I'll try to make it painless enough for both you and me that you don't walk away thinking that future audiences owe you for taking the hit today. I learned a week ago that I was going to speak today. As time passed over the past week and little usable copy made its way onto my paper, I began to think there might be some credence to the one criticism that Bob ever levied against me. Bill, there are amateur-crastinators and there are procrastinators. You most definitely are a procrastinator. Somewhat surprised my wife Kathy didn't shout in an enthusiastic hallelujah there. But in this case, the problem wasn't so much procrastination as it was trying to decide how I could even remotely describe how important Bob was in my life. Then my oldest daughter, Melanie, called to tell me about a conversation that she'd had with one of her best friends, Sherry Lynn, and the sky opened up for me. I had my lead. Now, what I'm about to tell you might leave you with the impression that Sherry Lynn is something that is. Nothing could be further from the truth. Sherry Lynn graduated from North Central High School in 1996 with a great weighted GPA that placed her second in a class of over 700. She holds a bachelor's and master's degrees, and her husband is Associate Dean of the School of Business at the University of Texas. In other words, Sherry Lynn has ample experience with success and with people who achieve. Sherry Lynn had met Bob through Melanie. She called him Uncle Bob because all of our kids, close friends, called him Uncle Bob. She knew that Uncle Bob and I looked somewhat similar. We sounded a lot alike. She also had attended a couple IU basketball games with us, so she knew that Uncle Bob was able to put his hands on some pretty good tickets. Nothing else really stood out to her about him. The day after Bob's death, Sherry Lynn reached out to Melanie by email to offer her condolences. A day or so later, her husband's uncle posted something about losing a legend, and it piqued her interest. She did a little internet searching, read article after article that praised Bob's knowledge and accomplishments, and talked about how accessible he had been to anyone who ever saw an audience. Then she called Melanie and opened her conversation with, "Holy smoke, Uncle Bob was a big deal." Yes, he was, Jerry Lynn. Yes, he was. And the reason you didn't know it is that he never acted like a big deal. He was perfectly content with being Uncle Bob. Bob, in fact, thrived on being an uncle, being a brother, being someone who's loved. You never had a moment's reason to doubt. When I was at my lowest, when I was felled by a ruptured aneurysm in 2002, resulting in a 2-month straight stay in neurointensive care at Methodist Hospital and a 17-hour surgical procedure to repair and clip the rupture, Bob and Julie were there for me. and my family. He and Julie visited every day of that 2-month hospitalization, sometimes sitting for hours and waiting just to get a few minutes with me on a visitation schedule that was fairly limited by the seriousness of my condition. When, after a year or so of resuming my practice, it became apparent that the brain bleed had done so much damage that I might not be able to continue to practice law, he took me with him to Lubbock to visit with Coach Knight, and just to give me the chance to clear my head and think about the future. Bob was equally important to our kids, and he always wanted to know what was happening in our lives. In some ways, I think having an uncle who was such a presence in Indiana athletics helped shape what they did with their lives. Melanie, for instance, who I mentioned earlier, interned with the Indiana Pacers when she was in college, and after graduating, she ultimately went to work for the Indianapolis Colts, where her first boss was actually a longtime friend of Bob. For nearly the past 20 years since leaving the Colts, Melanie has worked for and with Peyton Manning. Bob was fascinated by that relationship and was equally interested in her husband, Dean, a senior vice president of the Pacers organization, who spends his spare time as the head soccer coach at Speedway High School. Our son, Craig, may be the one whose career path was most shaped by growing up with Uncle Bob. Craig graduated from the University of Tennessee, where he worked his way through school in the sports information office. While Craig was at UT, Bob went along with me to both football and basketball games there. And he was greeted as an old friend by both the then sports information director, Bud Ford, and by Bruce Pearl, who was the UT basketball coach at that time. Craig is now an assistant athletic director in basketball SPD at NC State. Bob was thrilled for Craig and wanted to know every detail of his experience when NC State made its run in the Final Four 2 years ago. And throughout Craig's time in Raleigh, every visit I ever had with Bob elicited queries by Bob about how Pat was going to do this year. Our middle daughter, Michelle, became a teacher, so Bob didn't have as much of a career impact on her. She and her husband, Clint, now have 7 kids, which gave Bob plenty of material to talk about. The best memory I have of Bob's interaction with Michelle and Clint came before they were married. Clint's last name is Brand, which, as you might imagine, raised some concerns in Bob's mind. He blessed the marriage when he was assured by Clint that as far as he could tell, his branch of the Brand family was more closely related to Elton Brand than to Miles. Any lingering reservations that Bob may have had vanished when he was able to nab one of the Hammel Brand wedding signs that marked the route to their reception, and ultimately presented to Coach Knight. Finally, there's our youngest daughter, Mallory, who was born with a chromosomal defect. It resulted in a mental deficiency. No niece has ever been more valued than Mallory was in the eyes of both Bob and Julie. Bob was much more than a brother and an uncle. He was, in fact, a big deal. I got to experience just how big when I got the chance to work for him during my undergraduate years at IU. Now, for a little background, when I came to Bloomington as an 18-year-old freshman, I didn't really know Bob all that well. Has been so well documented by the many stories and remembrances that have been published since Bob's death. He graduated from high school when he was 16, and he went off to IU. His high school graduation occurred about 4 months after I was born. We probably didn't establish a real tight bond yet by the time he took off for Bloomington. Although he did come home to claim his first sports writing position at our hometown paper at the end of that first year, he and Julie got married when I was 5. So even including holidays at most, I had about 5 years exposure to Bob at the time I came to Bloomington as an 18-year-old. I started to make inroads to getting to know Bob in spring of my senior year in high school, when my then girlfriend and I came to Bloomington for a campus visit and overnight dorm stay. The day we left to return home, we swung by the HT for what was intended to be a short visit with Bob. Now, to set the stage for those who might be too young to remember those times, spring of 1971, when we made that trip to Bloomington, was the height of the Vietnam War. And the hottest topic of the war at that time was Lieutenant Calley and the My Lai massacre. Somehow Bob and I ventured into a discussion of My Lai during my brief stopover at the HT, and by discussion, I really mean argument. Heated and long, stretching well over an hour as we mad at each other. What's most remarkable is we pulled off that feat even though we were essentially on the same side. Bob and I were born and raised in Maine, a town that produced Dan Quayle and leans decidedly right in political matters. Yet Bob and I both came out of that setting as lifelong liberals who were against U.S. involvement in Vietnam and condemned the My Lai incident. Argument came down to what to do about it. Bob favored prosecution of Cali as a war criminal. I took the more lawyerly approach of saying, how could you possibly pick one act out of the illegal war and hold it up as being so egregious that it and alone should be prosecuted? You know, your own brother to brother, obviously. We didn't reach a meeting of the minds that day. We finally ceased hostilities long enough for my girlfriend and I to make our escape. As we drove away, she turned to me and asked me if my brother and I always fought like that. My response was, you know, I don't really know him all that well, so I don't know how to answer. but I sure hope we do. And spoiler alert, we did. I started working for Bob at the HT early in the fall semester of my freshman year. My initial duties were confined to taking calls on area high school games, played Friday and Saturday night, gathering stats for publication in the next day's paper, writing a brief 1 or 2 paragraph summary of the game. To be honest, that was about as Bob ever intended me to have. But by the end of that first semester, I had advanced to going on the road to cover high school games and file byline stories. In the second semester, Bob conceded that I might have a little more value than he had initially considered, and he assigned me to start staffing IU games, writing 1 or 2 sidebar stories for each game to supplement his game story column and whatever else he might throw poor John Harrow would try to stuff into the HT sports section. That advance was shockingly sudden, but frankly, Bob had underestimated the extensive training I had in getting me ready to take on my duties at the HT. There was no prior work experience, of course. I had never written anything for publication, even in my high school paper, let alone the Huntington Herald Press, where Bob had gotten his start. But I had done a lot of reading. Every stop that Bob made along his way, from the Huntington Herald Press to the Bloomington Herald Time and Telephone, Bob had made sure he set our parents up with a subscription to his paper. I read every issue of every paper we ever received through his subscriptions, and did it so religiously that without intending to, I developed a writing style that mimicked Bob. I was ready to get floor running because he had unknowingly done such a masterful job in training me. I ended up being at the HT for 3 years before getting married and moving on to other ventures. Most of that time went smoothly, but we did have our moments of butting heads. One occurred in the preseason before the start of football my sophomore year. At that time, there was something called the Big Ten Skywriters Tour, when all the various sports writers assigned to cover Big Ten football would travel by caravan to each of the Big Ten schools. It took about a week to get through that process, and Bob, as always, was part of that caravan plan. This particular Skywriters Tour did present one little problem for Bob, though. As part of the thoroughness of his preparation for the coming season and anything that might be thrown at him along the way, Bob always arranged to get the media guide for every major college football in the nation. Not just Big Ten, not just teams on Indiana's schedule. He wanted everybody. And he did the same for basketball. As the departure date approached for the Skywriters Tour, it occurred to him that he hadn't sent his letter out yet, seeking a football media guide. So he drafted a form letter, signed it, and left me the task of getting the letter mailed out to every Division I school. You may not have ever had any reason to think about it, but there are a lot of Division I football teams in America. And keep in mind that this was all pre-computer, meaning that every letter I sent had to be addressed and an envelope had to be prepared all on a manual typewriter. It was a lot of work, subject to the very real possibility of an error being made somewhere along the way. There was, of course, an error. At the time Bob got back from the Skywriters Tour, the media guides had started to arrive, and he was feeling pretty good about the way I'd gone about this. Then the letter from Marquette arrived. Bob opened it and crossed the room to the desk where I was working, slapped the letter down in front of me, and asked me how this could possibly have happened. The letter started out innocently enough, explaining that they had received our request for a football media guide. They couldn't comply because the Marquette football program had been discontinued following the 1960 season. Then they got a little smart, going on to note that they was somewhat surprised that a sports writer in Bloomington, Indiana, wouldn't be aware of the discontinuation of the program, since Marquette was the only team IU beat during that 1960s. Turns out that Bob, too, wanted to know how this letter got sent out and how I could possibly be unaware that Marquette no longer had a football program. I didn't do a whole lot for my cause when I pointed to the letter and said, "That letter's addressed to you. As far as Marquette's concerned, you're the one who didn't know that." It took me nearly a year and a half to Bob got his revenge. In December 1973, IU played in the Far West Classic in Portland, Oregon. Something had come up at home. I think Julie might have had some kind of health issue, but in any event, Bob decided he couldn't make the trip to Portland. As far as I can recall, this is the only time in Bob's career at PhD that he did not personally staff an IU basketball development. Instead, he sent me. Now, Bob Knight was in his third year at IU. The previous season, he had taken IU to his first Final Four, losing to eventual champion UCLA in the semifinals in St. Louis. The returning team was filled with names you might remember: Quinn Buckner, Scott May, Bobby Wilkerson, Steve Green, John Laskowski, Tom Abernathy, plus a new kid named Kent Benson. That group was ranked in the top 10 early in the 73-74 season and formed the basis of what became back-to-back undefeated regular seasons followed 2 years in Bob and Coach Knight's first national champion in 1976. In the 1973 Far West Classic, IU opened against what was thought to be a pretty good Brigham Young team and won by 44. A few nights later, IU played Portland, lost by 13 to an Oregon State team that ended the season with 500 record. The next night, IU beat Oregon by 9 in the third place game. That third place game was played on a Saturday night in Portland, which with the time difference meant the game ended right around the deadline for the Sunday morning edition of the VHT. Because we knew the timing was going to be tight, we arranged that I would transmit the box score and the bulk of the game story back to Bob. Bob would write the lead and slap it onto my story. And that's exactly what happened. And on Sunday, December 30th, 1973, VHT carried the story under my byline with Bob Hammel ghostwritten lead of Indiana, awesome at times and awful at others, during its 4-day trip to the West Coast, defeated Oregon 56-47 Saturday night to claim third place in the Far West Classic. Meanwhile, we flew back overnight from Portland with a short layover in Chicago, got back to Bloomington sometime late Sunday morning. And a couple hours later, around 2 o'clock, Bob got a call from Coach Knight. His message, cleaned up just a bit for today's purposes, was short. "Tell your goddamn brother that we're never at the golf hole." Bob responded with a simple, "I'll tell him." And he did. The next day, at the HT, nearly falling off his chair laughing. When I objected it had been him who wrote the lead, he calmly pointed to the byline and said, "As far as Bob's concerned, you're the one who called us that." We certainly had other moments of strife and humor during the time I was working, but I want to close with one other incident that occurred several years later, because it so well illustrates that no matter the circumstances, I was always the little brother in Bob's eyes. This one occurred in the late 1990s. By that time, I had obtained my law degree and was practicing in Indianapolis with the biggest firm in the state. My practice was concentrated in the area of tax law, and I had the opportunity to provide tax and legal advice to some of the wealthiest and most powerful people in Indiana. My client list included former governors, Lily Ayers, corporate CEOs. I laid all that out, not to try to impress anybody here, but just to kind of lend some perspective to what was at least widely regarded as the level of my expertise. Around this time, Bob was writing one of his books that he co-authored with Coach Knight. Coach's attorney had prepared a proposed contract for the book, and Bob asked me to review it. I did, ended up marking with a few suggestions that I thought would be tax advantageous for both Bob and Coach Knight. Once I completed the markup, I called Bob, briefly ran through my suggestions over the phone, and then asked him if he would like me to send him the markup version for further action. After a slight pause, Bob came back with, "I think I should probably run this by my accountant down in New Albany. He does this for a living." For the next 30 years, Up until a couple weeks before his death, the only thing I needed to do to elicit laughter from Bob was to mention he might want to run something past the guy in Rome. I'm going to miss that laughter. There's so many other things that can't along with the honor of being Bob Hammel's little brother.
Hello, I'm Rex Kurtz. I worked at Bob Hammel for 30 years. And one of the significant facts of that is, in 30 years, Bob Hammel never, ever said one nasty word to me. Never, and I know I messed up several times, but he would just grin and bear it, or gnash his teeth a little bit. But this has been a heck of a week, hasn't it? We've lost two great entertainers in the country, Bob Hammel and Hulk Hogan. I always thought it would be kind of neat to have Bob Knight and Hulk Hogan go at each other verbally, then have Bob write a story about it. In those 30 years, I never applied for a job. I never job at Louisville or Indianapolis or any place, because I knew I had a darn good situation here in Bloomington, and we had a great newspaper, and Bob was the boss. He was tremendous. He had never told me or John Harrell or Bruce Clevenger or Bob Getz, rarely did he ever give us an assignment. He said, here's your beat, and we would go cover it, and he would expect us to work. But he never micromanaged us, and that's the reason we all stayed there as long as we did. This was a rare individual, folks, and then the fact that we had a great sports section was a lot to do with everything. But I always tell people three things about Bob Hammel. One, he was the smartest man I ever met. And I can give a bunch of examples about that. That'd take too long. And two, he was a really kind individual, a great person, one you want your son to be like. And three, although Bob physically looked like the Pillsbury Doughboy, he was tough. I mean, mentally, the guy was tougher than anybody you'd ever meet. And he could do work that it was amazing. I would be over there at 11:30 or 12 o'clock on a Saturday night, so darn tired from working from 9 in the morning till midnight. And Bob would be over there still typing out a story. And I was about ready to go to sleep, and he was there working. One night, it was in the summer, there was a track meet at IU, and Bob was typing something, and they brought in the results from that track meet. It was a national track meet, and he brought in somebody brought in those results, and he wanted me to, this is 11:30 at night, the deadline is midnight, and he wanted me to type in all those results. And there was that many of them. And I said, which ones? He says, all of them. And that's about the only time I came close to ever saying a bad word about Bob Hammel. I got done at 1 o'clock, and I was still typing on one of those results at 1 o'clock. I'm surprised that somebody didn't come in and just pull the plug on us, but that never happened. I know Bob will long be remembered as the IU writer, but this man was, he was much more than that. Much more just an IU sports writer. He was, he knew everything about everything, I think. One day I walked into his house, and you can't walk through his house without stepping on a book. He was like a librarian, but he was intelligent about so many subjects. And it was fun to be around him, because you could ask him a question and he would give you an answer. And one of the areas he was really strong in was mentoring young students that he'd hired from IU or Bloomington. And he'd help these young people out, and some of them, like Mike Corita, he would help them out. Mike could go on to become a best-selling author. And then I read Mike's story about Bob a couple days ago, and everybody should read that, by the way. And I read Mike's story, and I told my wife, I said, you know, to read somebody as good as a writer as Corita, it humiliates you. You know, because if you think you're a good writer, then you read something that Bob, and it helps. And Bob, by the way, he never helped me. He never helped me. He never helped John Harold. He didn't help any of us regular people. He didn't correct us or improve us, nothing. He just let us go our own way and do the best we could. And most of us must have done something right, because just about every one of us are in the Indiana Sports Writers and Sportscasters Hall of Fame. So he was, somehow he was teaching us, and we didn't quite know it. But a lot of those people became those young people he met became great successes all through the country. Mike, not Sage Steele, but John Wortham with CBS now, 60 Minutes, and he went to North, and Bob helped him out. Lots of people like that. Tracy Dodds and Krista Tuckshorn, two ladies who worked for Bob and part-time, and one of them, I think, either became the sports writer or was about to become the sports editor of the New York Times, for God's sake. And Tracy and her and Krista, they formed a women's foundation. So all through Bob's mentorship. But to me, Bob's legacies, as numerous as they are, can be summed up in one word: greatness. Greatness. That's what I know about Bob, and I was going to keep it short. Then I started thinking of a few stories. And one day I was grousing in the office about something. It wasn't work, it was something else. And Bob was on the other side of the room. He said, Rex, think of your blessings. And I stopped what I was doing, and I wrote that down. Think of your blessings. And I shut up and started thinking some of my blessings. And he added a few that I wasn't thinking of. I remember the first thing he said was, Beth Ann marriage, you think about that. But that little piece of paper, the yellow piece of paper, I wrote that down. I kept that paper. It's at home right now on my desk from those years. That helped me, what Bob said, it helped me get straightened out. But he could do that. He didn't have to say a bunch of stuff. He was just he'd come right to a point with very intellectual information. And I think of that a lot. But I tell you, I messed him up. I made him mad a couple of times. And there was three things that happened. One, he wrote a big long story, IU football. I remember I think it was about John Eisenbarger. And I was putting the paper out that day. So I put it out, and it was done. And there was a story, that story was a big long one. And neither I nor the typesetter, Woody, realized that what we put in the paper on the front page, the sports page, was the back half of the story. We missed the whole front. Another time, I was putting the Monday paper out. It was during basketball season, and I put a story out on the front about whoever won the Daytona 500. And Bob had written at least two stories, IU basketball stories, and one was about Steve Alford. And I put that on page 2. I heard about that. I never did anything like that again. And I told you about the track story, yeah. And another thing, Bob would do some amazing things. One of them, Bill Veeck died, the former general manager of the Chicago White Sox. He died, And Bob had gone up there and had interviewed Bill once, and about a story. And it's 20 years later, and Bill died, and Bob was going to do another column about Bill Beck's life. So he searched through his files there in his drawers, and you won't believe this, but he came up with that notebook that he had interviewed Beck with 20 years before. He never threw anything away, never. But one night, I was putting the Sunday paper out, and Bob was up at Northwestern football game, bad weather. So I'm putting the paper out, it's 9 o'clock, and 10 o'clock, and 11 o'clock, and I'm putting the paper out, and I'm getting awful darn nervous because the deadline was midnight, and no Bob. About 11:30 he came in, he sat down, he didn't say a word. He must have sure he said he's got 3 or 4 stories. And he did, he had 3, at least, I think it was 4 pieces. And in 45 minutes, Bob wrote 4 things. Now that in itself is incredible, but what is even doubly incredible is that those were 4 good stories. The guy there was a reason he was Sports Writer of the Year in the state of Indiana for 17 times. He was pretty darn good. And one of the other really neat things, and I'll finish with this, was it was in daytime, that we hired Bob Knight. It was a Saturday, I was putting out the Saturday paper back then. We had a Saturday afternoon paper. We were an afternoon, not a morning. And I'm putting the paper out, and I get a call, I don't know, it's 9 or 9:30 in the morning, and I recognized the voice. I knew who it was, and I'm the only guy putting out the paper, didn't really help. And I recognized who it was, and he said, "What do you know about Bob Knight in the Army?" And I said, "Well, nothing. I don't know anything about him." He said, "Okay. Well, Indiana was trying to hire a new basketball coach at the time." And I said, "There, I continued. I wrote some more headlines and put the stories in all the pages. And then I stopped. I said, wait a minute. I know this guy, and I know he knows something." So I got on the phone, got a long-distance operator, and I said, "Miss," I said, back then they had long-distance operators. And I said, "Miss, I need some help. This is an emergency, and you got to stay with me. I need to get hold of a guy named Bob Hammel. He's in Ames, Iowa State, at the NCAA swimming meet." And of course, Indiana back then, when the Doc Council was raised, and they were contenders for the national championship. And I said, "I got to get a hold of Bob Hammel. This is very important." So she said, "I'll work with you." I said, "Call me back. Here's my number. Call me back if you find him." Well, she stayed with it, and somehow her and the people at Iowa State found Bob. He was at the swimming pool. This was in the morning. This is like 10 in the morning. And I told him about that call. And so we talked a little bit, and I said, "Bob, I need to write something." And he said, "Okay, let's do this. Go ahead and write a story and say something like, Bob Knight is expected to be named Indiana basketball coach tonight or tomorrow." I forget which the exact time situation was. But so I wrote that story. It's about that long. I put it in the middle of the page 1, sports page. And guess who got hired to be the Indiana basketball coach? Bob Knight. Well, now Bob Hammel had a source. I knew he had a source. I used to think it was a dentist in Terre Haute, but he had lots of good sources. Of course, he covered his feet. He knew everybody. And then Bob got back, and we had it on the Saturday afternoon paper, and we had it before the Indianapolis Star. And guess what was supposed to happen that weekend? Ray Marquette of the Indianapolis Star was with Bill Orwig, the IU athletic director, and they were going to scoop the Bloomington Herald Times on the hiring of Bob Knight. Wrong, boys. We kicked your butt on that one, didn't we? That was one of my greatest days in journalism. And it really was. And Bob and I work together. And we did a pretty good job with some other stuff too. But the fact that we work together, it's like a great team. And we scooped those guys on that story, and I've never forgotten it, and I never will. But I do love Bob Hammel, in case anybody should doubt that. I have always loved him. He saved my butt a couple of times, and he was so smart and so personal and so way ahead of almost everybody I've ever met. And I appreciate him and everything about him. And I'm glad to be able to let you people know what I feel about it. Thank you.
All right, when a friendship begins over the phrase, omit needless words, I feel an obligation to be brief. And I've written just enough supernatural stories to be troubled by the idea of a ghost editor with a red pen coming for me. So I will keep it short, Bob, I promise. I want to thank the family for working so hard to make Bob the public gift that he was, even in a moment of incredible private pain for you guys. Thank you, Bill, Julie, Rick, Marcy, Fred, and Jane for sharing him with us. Jane, you were superhuman last year. Can't thank you guys enough for that. Bob built up enormous energy down the stretch for visitors. If you saw him recently, he made sure people got great farewells. And there are probably enough doctors in this room that I hesitate to disclose the full diet plan he relied on during that time, but I will go this far. Stop by Jiffy Treat. Something special seems to be happening. We've already heard lovely remembrances of a great man, and I look forward to more, but I do think it's important to recall how much Bob valued honest reporting. Bob Hammel was a great man, yes, but he was not a saint. In fact, there are some who would say that a man who edits a thank you note from a 15-year-old and then returns the marked up note to the kid is a sadist. But this is precisely the kind of behavior we must reconcile to consider Bob as honesty. That thank you note editing was the start of our relationship more than 25 incredible years ago. I'd love to be able to tell you that his behavior improved. I really would. But he demanded accuracy, and so I regret to inform you that in one of our final sessions, Bob Hammel, Bloomington's great friend of literature, tried to steal a library book. He'd been asleep when I came into his room, so I was reading and waiting to see if he'd wake up, and suddenly I heard that voice. Mike, what do you have there? I showed him the book, and he flipped through it, put it on his chest, and folded his hands over it, and we had a wonderful chat that ranged from the Indiana Pacers to the question of an afterlife. And then he fell asleep again. At this point, I tried to slip the book out of his hands. He woke up and resisted with impressive force. Decades of typing and millions of words make for strong hands. His argument for keeping Monroe County's property was, quote, I'm going to get to this one tomorrow. It was only after I explained the legal peril and moral hazard of stealing a library book, particularly one checked out under my name, that he relented. And that's why I want to remember him, seeking one more book, one more piece of knowledge for the most remarkable mind I ever encountered. Well, I made a joke earlier about that ghost editor with the red pen. There's something real in that. Just writing this, I anticipated Bob's questions. I searched for the paragraphs he'd support, and I searched for those he would have bloodied up with red ink. I had to cut all my best jokes about the Chicago White Sox, and I assure you that was not out of respect for their ball club. I had some good material from the point of view of waitresses who had to endure 3-hour marathons that Bob called a lunch, and his persistent confusion with shift changes during those lunches. He asked anyone who walked by a table at D'Angelo's or O'Charlie's for coffee, And because he was so nice, coffee almost always appeared. Those lessons don't disappear now. I think one that is worth sharing today is that Bob maintained great friendships with countless people with whom he did not agree on all issues, or even many issues. Rare was the companion who agreed with him on politics and religion, open class high school basketball and Title IX, Bob Knight and Barack Obama, on and on. He was comfortable with that, and I think maybe more of us should be. In his memoir, he wrote, "Stimulate thinking, don't assault it." 5 simple words, and yet they contain a lesson that can change lives. I appreciate seeing the size of the crowd today, and he certainly would have. But if you want to honor Bob Hammel after you leave this room, I think the approach is simple. Ask people questions and listen to their answers. Now, as quick proof that Bob's teaching really does linger, I'm going to give you a quick Hammel editorial lesson. You're going to get 15 seconds of what I got for 25 years. I want you to watch the magic I can achieve once I hold this beloved red pen, his favorite weapon, and try to remember what he taught me. Here's what I wrote. Ask people questions and listen to their answers. 8 simple words with a clear message. I don't think it's bad. But now let me pretend to be Bob. I'll draw a red line through all of it. Every single word can be done. And then I will add a replacement. And it is a single, unpretentious word, active, 1 syllable, that conveys the exact same message. Care. Asking people questions and listening to their answers, which was Bob's life work on and off the clock, equals caring about people. So for my original sentence, we now have 8 words gone, 1 superior replacement, and it is the only word you need to hear about Bob Hammel. He cared. Thank you.
Dr. Alejandra Haddad was supposed to have officiated this memorial service. Sadly, she is currently out of state with her daughter, as her daughter deals with a very difficult pregnancy. And so on her behalf, I am reading exactly what she has written, with my own red marks. Very good. 1 Corinthians 13. If I could speak all the languages of earth and of angels, but did not love others, I would be only a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. If I had the gift of prophecy, and if I understood all of God's secret plans and possessed all knowledge, and if I had such faith that I could move mountains, but did not love others, I would be nothing. If I gave everything I have to the poor, and even sacrificed my body, I could boast about it, but if I didn't love others, I would not have gained a thing. Love is patient and kind. Love is not jealous or boastful or proud or rude. It does not demand its own way. It is not irritable, and it keeps no record of being wronged. It does not rejoice about injustice, but rejoices whenever the truth wins out. Love never gives up, never loses faith, is always hopeful, and endures through every circumstance. Prophecy and speaking in unknown languages and special knowledge will become useless, but love will last forever. Now, our knowledge is partial and incomplete. and even the gift of prophecy reveals only part of the whole picture. But when the time of perfection comes, these partial things will become useless. When I was a child, I spoke and thought and reasoned as a child. But when I grew up, I put away childish things. Now, we see things imperfectly, like puzzling reflections in a mirror. But then we will see everything with perfect clarity. All that I know now is partial and incomplete. But then I will know everything completely, just as God now knows me completely. 3 things will last forever: faith, hope, and love. The very greatest of these is love. My husband, and I met the Hammels 33 years ago when we first came to United Presbyterian Church here in Bloomington. They generously welcomed us into the community and almost immediately became our mentors, our adoptive family. Bob, Julie, and Jane were key pillars of our congregation. Their personal support was vital to me, especially as I felt called to ministry. And then Bob became my mentor. He encouraged me to preach and to write. He wrote my letters of recommendation when I applied to St. Meinrad School of Theology for a degree in theology and certification in spiritual direction. And he graciously accepted to read some of my work and then to become the editor of my thesis. I know that some of you present today have been both privileged as well as courageous enough to ask Bob to edit your work. I also know that you understand what it means to have Bob and his infamous red pen review your attempts at decent writing. But the truth is that it is thanks to his encouragement and to his generous mentorship that I've been able to continue growing and serving the church. I am sure this is also true for many of you. One day during his last stay at Bloomington Hospital, Bob and I shared the most memorable, sacred conversations. We spent together almost 2 hours of uninterrupted time, in itself miraculous because of the regular, uninterrupted stream of arriving visitors. Bob and I talked that day about his favorite things: his faith, Shakespeare, his love for his family and friends, and his very special relationship with his beloved mother. Betty was a central figure in Bob's life. From her, he learned his faith and his love for God. Long after her passing, her teachings and guidance remained a key and constant presence throughout his life, especially through his very last days. Bob had no fear of death. He had complete trust in his Savior. He felt privileged that his faith journey had allowed him the final gift of knowing where he was going and who was waiting for him. He left our world ready to meet his Savior, anticipating his reunion with his beloved mother. Several times during our conversations, Bob shared his overwhelming gratitude for the visitors who continually came demonstrating their love for him. Some of them had traveled from out of town just to come and see him. This unexpected pilgrimage of love brought him to the realization that, quote, maybe I had done something right. Maybe I'm just getting back the love that I've tried to share with the world. One night at the hospital, reflecting upon his blessings and his gratitude for all this love received, Bob experienced a vision in his sleep. At first he thought he had died, but then he realized he was just dreaming. Regardless, he shared with me, he felt as though he had ascended into a different dimension and experienced his life from God's point of view or plan. Through this transformative experience, he confirmed what he already knew, that life has meaning, and that the meaning of life is love. During this sacred time together, Bob beautifully recited by heart a fragment of Shakespeare, Macbeth's soliloquy on life's futility. But as he recalled its verses, he then reflected upon his own realization that, contrary to the poet's words, yesterdays do not light fools the way to dusty death. Rather, love lights the way to eternal life. Life is not a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. Instead, life is full of meaning when it is filled with love. The world knew Bob Hammel as a giant of journalism. We, his family, and his church family, knew Bob also as a man of profound faith, wisdom, and integrity. We had the privilege for decades to listen to his annual Father's Day sermons on the love chapter, which I read for you previously, in the Apostle Paul's letter to the church in Corinth. We witnessed over and over again how he lived this love that he preached. So in our remembrances today of our friend, our brother, our father, our grandfather, and our husband, let us do so together in the same love and gratitude that he modeled for us. Let us release Bob's spirit from our earthly families and communities, and let us commit him into God's eternal embrace and into the embrace of his mother. You taught us how to live, Bob, and you taught us how to die. Rest in peace, our gentle friend. Let us pray. Rest in peace, our gentle friend. We pray for safe passage as you journey into the embrace of your Creator and your dear mother. We also pray that this celestial reunion is all you hoped it would be. Know that as a faithful servant, you fought the good fight and you finished the race. You were our teacher, our mentor, and our friend. Our lives are certainly better because you were part of us, and also because you taught us how to live and how to die. Thank you for allowing us to witness the beauty of your complete surrender with gratitude and trust into eternal life. Amen.
About a week ago, I was contacted by Michael Carita, and he said, Bob Hammel's family would like you to speak at his service. And I told him, well, I'd be honored, but why does the family want me to speak? There's so many people out there that could certainly say lots of great things about Bob. And he said the family feels that when your dad hired him to write the biography, and he had an office to go to and a story to write again, that it actually extended his life. And I never thought about it that way. I mean, everything I saw Bob do, he always seemed to be enjoying it. I didn't realize how much at that point in time it meant to him. But I will say this, that as he started gathering material for the book that he wrote about my father, he would go out, my dad would tell him a story that he thought would be good in the book, and then Bob would go out and interview some of the other characters involved. And he made several trips. He usually would do the initial interviews always in person. So I know he went at least a few times to Canton, Illinois, I think Chicago, Indianapolis, I don't know where else. And he would come back with all this additional information on Dad's story that my dad didn't know. Background information, and then, he'd be talking to somebody and say, you ought to go talk to this guy over here, he might have some more detail. And I think in the process of putting that book together, I think during that period of time, those sessions that my dad had with Bob were kind of the highlights of his day. And I can't quantitatively say, but it's very possible that my dad being able to spend time with Bob may have extended his life as well. And that is something, as I've thought about it, that I will always be grateful to Bob for not just writing such a wonderful, actually 2 books about my father, but the fact that his humility and kindness may have extended my own father's life. And so I will always be grateful for that. I'm going to say a little something else too, that Bob was a perfect choice to write those books. My dad and Bob were about the same age. They had similar backgrounds. They were both raised in small rural towns in the Midwest. And so Bob sort of got my dad. He could get the meaning of his stories, and he could convey that on the page. And as I started reading the book, I realized he had these insights that I never ever would have thought of. But I think the key to it is something, as I think about it, about Bob, he had the knack. He didn't go to college for journalism. You know, he pretty much started working right out of high school. But something gave him that knack, and I think it was a kindness. And, you know, it's been in the news here that the famous story about Bob Hammel getting the only interview of Mark Spitz in the Olympics, and how he did that. Now, it was, to me, it strikes me as a combination of cleverness, resourcefulness, strategic absent-mindedness. But here's the thing. He got to Mark Spitz, but then Mark Spitz had to be willing to talk to him. And there is the key. Bob was the sort of person, he could meet anybody in the world, and that person would instinctively know this guy is okay to talk to. And looking back over the countless articles that I read growing up in the newspaper with Bob's writing, I think the key to his success is this, is that he was a good listener. He appeared to care because he really did. But he always, his motivation, his goal, when he interviewed a subject, was to get their story in as few words as possible into the newspaper, and to be fair and kind. And even though he had to cover things that might be unpleasant, I don't think there were very many people that were upset with Bob about their coverage in the newspaper. And I think that is both, you have to have a moral commitment to do that, not just a technical skill to do that. And I think that speaks, all of us today have been talking about how nice Bob was, how caring he was, what a great human being he was. But he was able to apply that to his work. And that's why he was successful. And I even had the privilege of being interviewed by Bob for the book. And the way he handled all those stories, they said, he gets it, and he cares. And he cared about everything and everyone that he met. And I can't think of a higher compliment that I could pay to someone like that. And the honor to speak here, I can't say enough how honored I am to be able to come up here and say and praise and thank Bob Hammel for being the kind of man that he was.
As Carl just said, I'm honored to represent IU Athletics here today. As all of you know, IU Athletics has a long, rich history of greatness. from Bob Knight to Mark Spitz to Bill Garrett to Bill Mallory to so many others. We've had so many incredible stories to tell. Our department, our student athletes, our coaches, and most of all our fans have been so lucky that for more than 40 years we had a true giant in the sports writing profession, chronicling everything and anything that happened in IU sports in Bob Hammel. While Bob was probably best known nationally for his award-winning work covering IU men's basketball, Coach Bob Knight in the Hoosiers, that was just a small piece of the impact and influence on our department. He cared deeply about each of our sports and student athletes. If there was a great story to tell about IU track and field, or swimming and diving, or women's tennis, he did it with style, he did it with a love, and a level of excellence that was unmatched. Because of that passion for sharing our stories, both big and small, he was also the historian of IU athletics. He had an encyclopedic knowledge about our student athletes' accomplishments, and the same goes for his command of the history of the Big Ten Conference and the leadership role it's played in the growth of intercollegiate athletics. As former Big Ten Commissioner Jim Delaney told me on the phone earlier this week as we were talking about Bob's passing, we have really lost a true legend, Scott, a legend like no other. As revered and renowned and respected as Bob was in his profession in the world of college athletics, he was also extraordinarily selfless. His behind-the-scenes contributions were enormous in the construction of Cook Hall, as well as the Hinkey Hall of Champions. He's been an invaluable resource as a member of IU Athletics Hall of Fame Selection Committee for years, as well as an incredibly deserving inductee to that same body more than 2 decades ago. He was also someone who treated everyone, no matter who they were or weren't, with a level of kindness that I wish more people would emulate. Let me tell you a story about his interaction with a 20-year-old IU basketball student manager in 1987, which was me. We were on a basketball trip to Iowa, and we lost a tough game. It was a night game. Never forget it. That obviously was a great team, great year. We lose the game late night, and for those of you familiar with Indiana basketball, when you lose a game, you get out of town, it's like you're leaving Afghanistan. You just absolutely get out as quick as you can. That's part of the drill. It happened to be that night, it was a late night game, and the weather in Iowa, which it can be, was really bad. It was extremely cold, snowy, very windy, and as we got to the airport, there was questions whether the IU plane could get out. So we were moving really fast. And for those of you who don't know, the bus pulls right up to the plane. We've got the plane sitting right there in the tarmac, and you quickly get off and get the gear, the bags onto the plane, and we go. As a manager, I was the last one, and as I'm checking everything, there's one briefcase left under the bus, and I grab it quickly, and I start to slip as I grab it. Everyone else is on the plane. I fall, the briefcase flies open, and literally everything in the briefcase falls onto the tarmac. Everything. There was a word processor, there was wires, cassette tapes, papers everywhere. And I remember seeing that. I'm like, that's Mr. Hammel's briefcase. And if you have that moment in your mind where, I'm not sure what I'm going to do right now. So I looked up and the pilot was kind of waiting because we were trying to go. And so I quickly just grabbed everything and stuffed it in the briefcase. And I tried to shut the briefcase, but it was literally this far from me. And I remember walking onto the plane and Mr. Hammel, as I called him, sat right up close to Coach Knight, and I didn't want Coach Knight to see it either. And so I carried the briefcase, and I never forget Mr. Hammel's face when I walked up to him, and he's looking at me, and I said, Mr. Hammel, we had a problem with the briefcase. And I said, I'm so sorry. I did all I could to get everything back in there. And I handed it to him, and there was literally snow and ice dripping off of it. And he looked at me, and he just smiled, and he said, things like that happen, Scott, it'll be okay. And it was so nice. And I remember going back to my seat, and I watched him the entire hour-plus flight, taking everything out, one piece by piece, and drying it off. And he got it back together, and And I remember walking by him when we got back to Bloomington and just apologizing to him again and said, I'm so sorry that happened. And he just said, Scott, it's no problem at all. Just things happen. You could have been nicer. Fast forward, I was working at the athletic department. It had to be 10 or 15 years later, and we were somewhere on a trip, and we were talking, and I said, at that point I could call him Bob, and I remember saying, Bob, you remember that trip that you were on back in Iowa a long time ago, and your briefcase, somebody dropped it, and stuff went everywhere, and he goes, oh yeah, that was awful. And I said, that was me. And he laughed so hard, he thought that was the greatest thing. From that point on, that was kind of our thing. We would be around each other, and he'd be carrying something, and I'd say, hey, let me get that for you. He said, no, I'm good. But that's how I remember Bob, and that's who Bob was. So in closing, we've lost a true legend, but more important than that, we have all lost one of the most kind-hearted individuals that we're all lucky enough to be able to call a friend. Thank you.
I'm Rick Hammel, my dad's son, oldest child, and I'm glad to be here to speak with you. But before I get started talking about Dad, there's some things I want to make sure that we address. First, my family and I just want to thank everyone here for taking time to come be a participant in this service, this celebration honoring Dad's amazing life. Everyone here has played some part in his life, and we're honored that you're here. And we hope you'll come to the reception that follows after this service. Second, on behalf of my father, I want to thank the medical community of Bloomington for the outstanding care provided by my dad, particularly in his last 10 months of life. The compassionate, caring physicians, nurses, rehab professionals, and staff helped Dad through many ups and downs from last October through last Sunday, helping us navigate a complicated path from managing his numerous health challenges to making the transition to hospice care these last few months of his life. So I thank them as well. Third, I want to thank our speakers who were willing and honored to each share some thoughts about Dad. It means a lot to our family, and we're delighted that they accepted that invitation. Thank you again, each of you. And last but not least, I want to thank my younger sister and only sibling, Jane, or as I call her, Sis. She has been tirelessly on call, night and day, to quickly respond to any issues involving Dad's care and updating me as soon as possible. She's had a lot thrown at her over the past 13 months to manage, starting with my parents' transition from independent living in their own home to assisted living at Gentry Park Senior Living, to Dad being in and out of the hospital and transition to advanced skilled nursing care facilities, and then finally to hospice care. She handled her caregiver role with grace and tender care. Her husband Fred has also been a tremendous support to my dad as well. Now about my dad, I've thought about a lot this week of what I could tell you about Dad that you might not already know. I've read the many glowing tributes about his work, legacy, and impact on others, listened to several interviews Dad did over the years. Took comfort in getting to hear his voice again, sharing his thoughts on many topics. So here's my attempt. For me and Sis, Dad was always more than just a parent. He was also a public figure that he shared with the community, particularly his large following of readers. Through his writings, his readers felt a strong personal connection with Dad. As a very kind, positive, honest, relatable, and approachable person. Many times when we were at a restaurant in town, it was always fun to observe someone who we didn't know come up to Dad and say hello, and usually ask him a question or two about a recent IU game or team. Dad would respond to the question, would respond to the question and patiently engage in a short conversation, leaving the person feeling quite happy to have initiated the discussion. After the person had left, we, my mom, sis, and me, would all turn to Dad and ask him, who were you speaking with? Do you know them? It certainly seemed like you did. Dad would just laugh, confess that he didn't know the person, but certainly didn't want that person to walk away feeling that way. Besides this public persona, there are 4 words that immediately come to mind for me about Dad, and some of them have already been mentioned. Faith, family, friendships, and, above all, fun. First, about faith. Dad was a devout Presbyterian, and we've heard that from Alejandro, and deeply loved his church community. He enjoyed giving an annual Father's Day sermon, where he would also plan out the whole service, including the hymnals and scripture readings. He did this annual event for 25 years. However, I want to talk about faith from another lens. My dad was a very easygoing parent. Nothing seemed to rattle him. He was kind, loving, and patient with me and sis. Didn't believe in setting a lot of rules for how we should behave. Just expected us to instinctively know what the right thing to do should be in any situation we encountered. Kind of similar thing to what Rex talked about, even, in the sports department. He didn't micromanage us at either. He placed tremendous faith in us, trusting that we wouldn't let him or Mom down. He did love a phrase from Shakespeare's Hamlet, "To thine own self be true," which he felt was a key principle for us to live by. He found a plaque with this simple phrase that he hung up on a wall in our home, serve as a constant reminder for us. He shared his interpretation of this phrase with us, meaning, be honest and authentic, don't conform to peer pressure or try to be someone else. Just be you, that'll be good enough. These were very deep, profound, and powerful concepts to guide you through your teens and college years, but looking back, I think this approach was highly effective for both of us. It was also a highly effective approach for Dad. Through his 43 years of sports writing, he stayed true to his writing, keeping consistent with an honest, accurate, and positive voice, not giving in to the evolving trend of the day of Howard Cosell reporting of sarcasm, criticism, and second-guessing of coaches and athletes. Dad felt very strongly that he wasn't a coach or an athlete, so who was he to think he knew better than them? Next, about family. Dad's love for his immediate family, Mom, me, and Jane, has been well described. The June column that Greg Doyle wrote in the Indy Star about Dad made that abundantly clear. Dad did take us on 2 extended vacations during my years up through finishing college. Summer before my senior year in high school, we had a 3-week trip to North Carolina with the first week in Raleigh for the U.S. Olympic men's basketball trials in 1976. And the remaining 2 weeks exploring the rest of the state. The other trip was spring break for a week vacation my senior year in college, when Dad covered the NCAA swimming and diving championships at Harvard, along with us catching a Knicks Celtics game in Larry Bird's rookie year at the old Boston Garden, in addition to many seemingly historical sites in the Boston area, including Lexington and Concord. Both were fun family vacations, so Dad had to combine a lot of work with a bit of vacation. What I enjoyed most was just going on the road with Dad when he covered the game. It was fun to watch him work, and if I was fortunate to sit with him in the press area and provide good assistance, I dutifully followed his only rule: no cheering in the press box. We had a lot of great conversations traveling to and from these events as well. I always did tell him, though, Rex, that, sometimes when it was at a football game, IU football game in the press area, I'd say, how come Mr. Kurtz gets to cheer? And he'd just look at me like, oh, you don't know. So, Dad's love and support extended to my family and Jade's family as well. My daughters, Mackenzie and Cameron, both did their undergraduate educations at IU over a span of 5 years, in which my parents enjoyed getting to do lots of activities with them, including dinners and going to shows in the IU auditorium. Through Dad, or as they would say, Grandpa or Grampy, They developed a love for sports, both as participants as well as passionate spectators. By each studying at IU for 4 years, they got a much better appreciation of what Grampy had accomplished in his sports writing career. Over in Cincinnati, he didn't travel quite as well, but the Enquirer did pick up stories from the Star this week. Grampy and Grandma had been active grandparents throughout their lives, childhood, college, and beyond. Some of the time getting together was attending sports events, of course, IU basketball and football games, Cincinnati Reds, Bengals games, but also graduations, high school, college, advanced degrees, and other activities, music concerts and recitals, tennis matches, and Mackenzie's marriage to our son-in-law Reza during the COVID pandemic. For Cameron, it also involved Grampy traveling with me to see her every year during her 3 years of law school. And yes, catch a basketball game in Cameron Indoor Stadium each year, compliments Coach K. Additional visits to NYC her first year after law school. Grampy took us to the 2017 Heisman Trophy dinner. Baker Mayfield was the winner that year. And in her first year in Boston working with the Red Sox, Cameron got tickets for Grampy and I to see his beloved White Sox during a very cold Mother's Day weekend. So cold that Dad decided that, you know, we can leave after the 6th or 7th inning of the game on Saturday night. And my Uncle Bill, who was our leadoff speaker today, no doubt has covered Dad's love for his parents, siblings, cousins, nieces, and nephews. We've all felt Dad's love for each of us. As to friendships, they were a big part of Dad's world. Everyone here is well aware of Dad's long friendship with Coach Knight. They were very close and spent countless hours together, talking about lots of subjects, some sports related, but also history, literature, politics, to name a few. Dad didn't have a better friend than Coach. I'm sure somewhere in the heavens they've already started up their conversations needling each other. However, Dad felt similarly about many of the coaches he covered at IU. They too were friends. That is John Bont, Lee Corso, Bill Mallory, Doc Councilman, Hubby Billingsley, Jared Yeagley, just to name some. He enjoyed relationships with all of them. Even after he retired in 1996 from his sports editor job, he still tried to keep up with getting to know the new coaches and the sports he had covered for years. And even added more sports to his portfolio, particularly women's basketball. Dad's friendship ties at IU included university presidents, administrators, faculty, staff, and of course many student athletes. He had many visitors, several with IU ties, that came to visit him during his prolonged illness over the last several months. We are grateful for all that could come and see him during these past several months. Dad had many other groups of friends. His hometown of Huntington friends, his colleagues from the HD, his media colleagues, local, state, and national, whom we always enjoyed seeing frequently at IE basketball and football games each year, Big Ten Conference commissioners, office administration, and BTN media personnel, other universities and their athletic staff, coaches, and student athletes, local and state politicians, mayors, governors, congressmen, senators, and even a vice president. And of course, his many Bloomington friends that joined him in his weekly breakfast clubs on Wednesdays and Fridays. Dad might not have been a wealthy person, but he had an abundance of friends. Finally, let's talk about fun. Dad loved writing, and he shared his thoughts with his readers. Although he worked very hard at his craft, it was a labor of love, and he seemed to have a lot of fun doing it. Still writing books in his early 80s and winning a National College Football Sports Writing Award about the passing of George Talapera, his first hero in IU football and IU sports in general. That award happened to be an award that my dad had established when he was president of the College Football Writers Association nearly 25 years earlier. I learned from him it was important to find a job you love, working with colleagues you have, and have fun being around, and a community you enjoy being in. For Dad, that was sports editor at HD for 30 years and living in Bloomington for the past 58. Dad, thank you for the life coaching tips that you have provided to guide me and sis through each stage of life. You've given me inspiration and a blueprint on how to prepare for my next retirement after completing my federal public service career. I know I'll need to figure out how to keep my brain and body active while I'm making sure to stay socially connected with others to hopefully have this long and enjoyable life that you've had. Further, Dad told us over the last several weeks, as some others have related, that he had no regrets. He was filled with gratitude for the wonderful life he had and that he was ready to go. Not sure that we, his family, was as ready for him to go, but we took comfort that he was able to pass away peacefully without pain in his sleep. May light perpetual shine upon him. Amen.
A reading of Psalm 23. The Lord was, is, and will always be God's shepherd. He lacks for nothing. The Lord has led him to the greenest of pastures, beside the stillest of waters, along the path of relationship with God. And although Bob has walked through that valley of the shadow of death, he feared no evil. His shepherd's rod and staff comforted him the entire way. God had even prepared for him a feast of celebration right there in the very presence of the greatest enemy, death. Goodness and mercy have followed Bob all the days of his life, and he is dwelling in the house of his Father now and forever and ever. You will not believe me when I tell you this. Bob felt that he had failed. He carried a raw regret that he had not finished IU. Then something incredible happened. There came to be, hanging upon his office wall, his 3 Indiana University degrees. Only his were people, not paper. Those people are you, Bill, his brother, and you, Cameron and Mackenzie, his 2 brilliant granddaughters. You did for him what he could not. By your degrees, he felt both proud and compensated. And he then, at that point, came to see how God had really directed all of his life movements. God partnered with Bob to transform that painful regret into a new sense of pride and peaceful satisfaction. Now I realize that I'm an anomaly here. I thought I was the only one with no connection to Indiana University, but then I bumped into a Buckeye, and where are you? Well, knowing this will help you understand what I'm about to say. What enthralls me the most about IU campus is not Assembly Hall, not Hankey Hall, no offense, or even Lilly Library, all places I've relished. No, none of these. But there at the end of Dunn Meadow, predating the school's oldest buildings, stands one magnificent Quercus macrocarpa, bur oak. This one stellar specimen tree, prolific in its production of uniquely large acorns, and with a root system that both anchors it and gives it access to deep waters. Over 180 years old, this irreplaceable giant may grace our campus another 300 years. And you all know exactly what I'm going to say next. Robert Hammel was a spiritual bur oak. That oak in Dunn Meadow stands for all of us as a monument to him. As a hopeless extrovert, I meet a whole lot of people. They're all my best friends. And in my 29 years of life, I have never met a person with as much hope, peace, and joy as Bob Hammel. He was a friend of the accomplished, a friend of the humble, and indeed a friend of Jesus. Bob didn't just have faith. He was authentic because his faith was about relationship, not religion, not simply morality. He lived with integrity because his faith was fully integrated. I did not know him long, not at all, but this I will tell you. During his death journey, I came to cheer him up, but it was always the other way around. I left transformed by his amazing love. Once, immediately following a surgery, I had tracked him down at the nursing home, and I expected to find him in his room. He wasn't there. I went to the PT room. He wasn't there. I asked all around, and here he was in a wheelchair, right in the midst of all of the corridors with the people. And that first moment, when I introduced myself, he just turned around, beaming with that magic smile I've come to know is a trademark of his. Friends, from unconditional love for each and every single one of you, Bob wants us to hold on to something very special in his absence. Not his awards, not his books, not his halls of fame, no. Bob's deepest desire is this, that you and I search out, find, and hold on to that spiritual taproot, so that we may all come to draw more and more deeply from our sacred reservoir, with a water that's accessible to everyone. A water that gave Bob his advantage to be all he had been designed by God to be. Oh, for us to be able to tap into a space like that, that transforms regret into vicarious satisfaction, that surprises even an embittered sufferer with an unforeseen epilogue, a reservoir that empowers a human heart to declare at the end of life, but wait, there's even more to come.
And I love that old cross where the dearest and best for a world of lost sinners was slain. So I'll cherish
Into your care now, dear Lord, we entrust our beloved Bob Hammel. With delight, you imagined him. With joy, you shared him. Now with satisfaction, receive him back again. Friends, go out now into the world. But as you go, remember to put your hand into the hand of God. And may that great God of peace, who raised up from the dead the good shepherd of the sheep, and Bob, equip you all to do every good thing from God's heart.